Good morning, students. I hope I'm audible. Prateek, आवाज आ रही है? All right, thank you. So we were talking about the Great Revolt of 1857, and we had started to discuss the causes. The economic and political causes we had already covered. We still have to cover the administrative, military, and socio-cultural causes. Right? So first, administrative causes. What do you think were the problems with the administrative machinery of the colonial regime which caused resentment among Indians? किस तरह के causes रहे होंगे? First of all, discrimination in matters of recruitment, appointments, promotions, transfers, salaries, etc. ठीक है? So institutional racial discrimination. In the civil service, in the military, in other sectors such as private enterprise, banking, even commerce, there was institutional racism baked into the colonial administrative machinery. Further, और बताओ. Before the British, during the Mughal period, it was Indians who populated the administrative machinery from the bottom to the very top, right? The court language of the Mughals, what was it? Persian, right? It was replaced in 1837 by English. Now, the administrative elite who were familiar with Persian, in fact, who were well versed with Persian, found themselves to be completely useless. They could not even function within the outside realm of the administrative machinery. For example, lawyers को भी अब अंग्रेजी जाननी जरूरी होगी, right? So the replacement of Persian with English as the court language. Now, this harmed the interests of Persian educated elite, most of whom came from the upper crust of Muslim society, the Ashrafiya community. So, they harbored a great degree of resentment towards the colonial regime. Thirdly, what was the nature of the administrative machinery? Was its purpose to serve the people it was governing? No, it was to make the process of their exploitation more efficient. The machinery was extremely unfeeling and insensitive. It had an alien, foreign character, which could never gain the trust of the people it was supposed to serve. So the insensitivity of administration and its alien character played an important role in the gradual accumulation of general discontent. What is the first point of contact between the people and the state? The higher levels of administration or the lower levels of administration? Lower levels of administration, petty officials, आपकी रोज की जिंदगी में किस तरह के ऑफिशियल्स के बारे में बात कर रहे होंगे हम? जो कोर्ट के अर्दली हो गए, क्लर्क्स हो गए गवर्नमेंट ऑफिसेज के, या फिर पुलिसमैन हो गए जो ऑर्डिनरी पुलिसमैन होते हैं, उस तरह के लोग, कोर्ट के बाहर बैठने वाले नोटरीज हो गए, राइट? दीज काइंड्स ऑफ पीपल. Now, the administrative machinery had created a niche for them to exploit the people directly through heavy corruption. So, the petty corruption caused a great degree of resentment among the ordinary people, since it was the first point of contact between the state and the general public. And this further eroded the trust of the people in the state itself. ठीक है? अच्छा. Now, suppose there was a conflict of interest between British commercial interests and the interests of the native population. Who do you think that the administrative machinery is going to favor? In almost all cases, the British commercial or economic interests. And this gave a sense of desperation, a sense of helplessness to the people. The state is supposed to be the protector of the general interests of the public. That is what the people of India had been accustomed to. Even in the case of the tribal communities, as we had seen, that the change of the government, the change of the administrative machinery stripped the people of their autonomy. They started feeling helpless in their own region, right? And this also was a major cause of resentment. A feeling of helplessness due to anti Indian bias of the administrative machinery, right? So, do you think that the Indians had any real reason to remain loyal to the British? No. Only those small sections of Indians who benefited directly from British rule would be expected to remain loyal to them. For example, the big money lenders, the big zamindars, the princely states who were given protection by the British, etc., or those who feared British reaction if they were to support the rebels, or if they were to cause any rebellion against the British. Only they are going to profess and maintain their loyalty. Rest everybody else who has heavily suffered due to the introduction of British administration is going to harbor a great amount of discontent, resentment against the British, and they are the most likely to rebel against the British whenever a mutiny or a rebellion breaks open. Okay, so these are the administrative causes. एक एक करके इनको लिख लेते हैं. First, write down. Give the heading administrative causes और उसमें लिखो institutional racial discrimination. Institutional racial discrimination. Write down. The colonial administrative machinery was inherently racist. Was inherently racist. Full stop. Indians were discriminated against in matters of appointment, salary, promotions, transfers, postings, etc. Subpoint example: no Indian could aspire to enter the ICS. Next example: no Indian in the army could attain a rank higher than Subedar, higher than Subedar. Next example: Indian soldiers received a salary that was on average 5 times lower than European counterparts of the same rank. Next point: the barracks and mess. Next example: the barracks and mess of Indian soldiers were separate and inferior to European soldiers. Next example: European officials routinely verbally and physically abused Indian soldiers. Often referring to them with derogatory terms or with derogatory names. ठीक है, यू कैन इमेजिन किस तरह की लैंग्वेज यूज करते होंगे, राइट? सो this kind of discrimination was very hurtful to the emotions, to the sentiments of the Indians. Not only was the machinery itself excessively discriminatory in matters of equal treatment, but it allowed or it overlooked the abuse of Indians at the hands of European seniors. ठीक है, तो ये हो गया institutional racial discrimination. Second right, replacement of Persian with English as the court language. Replacement of Persian with English as the court language. English as the court language. Write down. In 1837, Persian was replaced by English as the official language for all government business. For all government business. Full stop. Next point. Earlier, the Muslim Ashrafia community within brackets you can write affluent class. AFFLUNENT. Affluent class. Close brackets. Which was fluent in Persian. Were employed as government officials. Full stop. Suddenly, they lost their major source of income. And were forced into penury. PENURY. पेन्यूरी मतलब पॉवर्टी होता है, ठीक है. Into penury. Now, this class had enjoyed a great degree of influence as well as respect within the society for hundreds of years, right? They were the elites of the society. So it was not possible for them to suddenly let go of their affluence. They felt that pang very bitterly. They could neither enter common life nor could they beg on the streets. This would be against their perceived sense of honor. And thus, they were forced to swallow this bitter, you can say, gulp without making much of a noise. But they definitely felt a great degree of anger, and this explains why they so enthusiastically lent their support to the rebels during the Great Revolt of 1857. Clear? So, ये हो गया replacement of Persian with English as the court language. Third, right, insensitivity of administration and its alien character. Insensitivity of administration and its alien character. Write down. The colonial administration was designed not to serve the Indians, but to make their exploitation more efficient. Full stop. Next point. The machinery was guided by the objective of maximizing economic returns for the British and revenue. And revenue. Full stop. Next point. Thus, it emerged as the enforcer, for the drain of wealth, for the drain of wealth. Full stop. Next point. Further, comma, the administration maintained a clearly demarcated boundary between Europeans and Indians, and made no attempt to win the trust of Indians, Next point. As a result, it assumed the character of an insensitive, exploitative, and distinctly alien regime. An insensitive, exploitative, and distinctly alien regime. Full stop. Ordinary Indians felt no goodwill towards it. Rather, they felt extreme resentment. Okay? So this is the third administrative factor, insensitivity of administration and its alien character. Clear hai? Next, write petty corruption. Write down. The lower level of administration is the first point of contact between the state and the people. Next point. The British administrative machinery that emphasized upon absolute control and the suppression of common aspirations provided an opportunity for petty officials such as law clerks, constables, watchmen, uh, revenue assessors, revenue assessors, and accountants accountants to freely exploit the people, to freely exploit the people. Full stop. Next up point. Sorry, next point. Petty corruption was a major contributor towards the erosion of public trust in the colonial regime. And caused deep-seated resentment. Okay? After all, this was the face of the colonial administration that was actually visible to the people most frequently. So they were rightly convinced that the rest of the colonial administration is also like this, since it is not intervening on their behalf to stop this extortion, to stop this corruption and exploitation. ठीक है? तो ये हो गया petty corruption. And finally, feeling of helplessness due to anti-Indian bias of the administrative machinery. Fifth, feeling of helplessness due to anti-Indian bias of the administrative machinery. ठीक है? Write down point wise. The British administration was designed to facilitate British economic interests which were often in conflict with the interests of ordinary Indians. Full stop. Next point. Thus, the British laws, their courts, their institutions, and the police had an inherent anti-Indian bias. Full stop. Next point. Indians also gradually recognized this. and became increasingly desperate and became increasingly desperate. Full stop. Gripped by a sense of helplessness, gripped by a sense of helplessness, comma, the general masses were fuming with anger, were fuming with anger, and perpetually looking for ways to express it, to express it, for ways to express it. Right? Now, what is the British response towards this going to be? To loosen control over Indians, to give some relief to Indians, or to further strengthen their control, further tighten their control? तो डंडा चला करके इमोशंस को कंट्रोल करने की कोशिश कर रहे थे. राइट? राइट डाउन. The British response was invariably, the British response was invariably to terrorize and demoralize the Indians. And demoralize the Indians. और इसका नतीजा क्या हुआ? गुस्सा कम हुआ या और बढ़ गया? Which further angered Indians. ठीक है? Full stop. Next point. Thus, the large amount of civilian participation, the large amount of civilian participation during the Great Revolt was not surprising. Was not surprising. ठीक है? तो ये हो गए आपके एडमिनिस्ट्रेटिव कॉजेज. नेक्स्ट, दी मिलिट्री कॉजेज. तो कुछ मिलिट्री कॉजेज तो हम ऑलरेडी एड्रेस कर चुके हैं. दैट इज ओपन डिस्क्रिमिनेशन बोथ एट एन इंस्टीट्यूशनल एज वेल एज पर्सनल लेवल इन दी मिलिट्री. तो रेशियल डिस्क्रिमिनेशन. ठीक है? आई डोंट थिंक वी नीड टू रिपीट दिस. जो एडमिनिस्ट्रेटिव कॉजेज में आपने लिखा था, आप उसके जो रेलेवेंट पोर्शंस हैं यहाँ पे ऐड कर सकते हो. सेकेंडली, what in the essence was the nature of the ordinary Indian sepoy? कहीं और से आ रहा था कि जनरल लोगों में से ही आया था? जनरल लोगों में से ही आया था. So was it possible for him to remain unconcerned about the suffering of his family members, of the members of his village, of the members of his community, the general people of his region or the state that he was a part of? Was it available? Was it possible for him to remain aloof, or will he also feel the same kind of discontent? He'll also feel the same emotion. He'll also feel the same exploitation, the same economic pinch, right? And thus, the sepoy was essentially a peasant in uniform, and it was impossible for him to overlook the suffering of his brethren, of his civilian brethren. ठीक है? So this was one major reason. Where was the mutiny the most intense? Awadh के region में. Rebellion was also most intense in the region of Awadh. Why do you think this was? क्योंकि मोस्ट रिसेंटली अवध को ऑन शेकी ग्राउंड्स एनेक्स करा गया था एंड वहां पर महलवारी सेटलमेंट को इंट्रोड्यूस किया गया था. The ordinary peasants also felt the burden of taxation increasing, and this translated into growing discontent among the sepoys from Awadh. That is why the sepoys from Awadh were one of the most significant participants in the rebellion against the company's army. ठीक है? एक रीजन और है फॉर द मिलिट्री कॉजेज दैट service in the company's army was coming into greater conflict with the personal religious beliefs of the sepoys, right? So growing religious tension. What were those things which were causing religious tensions among the Indian sepoys? First of all, many of their superior officials, the European officials, openly emphasized upon the superiority of Christianity to either Islam or Hinduism. They openly mocked the Hindu gods, the Islamic faith. So this was going to cause natural resentment among the Indians. तो चिढ़ मचेगी, इसकी वजह से गुस्सा आएगा. सेकेंडली, हर आर्मी के एक कंपनी के साथ एक रिलीजियस ऑफिशियल अटैच्ड होता था उस जमाने में. दैट वाज नोन एज द चैपलिन. ही वाज अ क्रिश्चियन ऑफिशियल. उसका काम एक्चुअली ये होता था टू परफॉर्म द लास्ट राइट्स ऑफ क्रिश्चियन सोल्जर्स हु वर डाइंग ऑन द बैटलफील्ड, राइट? बट बिकॉज अंग्रेजों का रूल था, सो दीज पीपल वर गिवन अ फ्री रेन. They began to openly profess and proselytize their faith. Some Indians were pressurized to convert to Christianity also. Otherwise, उनके साथ बदसलूकी की जा रही थी, right? The army brass was also in tune with the chaplain's mission, right? So this was going on. This further caused resentment. It created a sense that the Europeans, the army of superior officials, were deliberately trying to harm their religion. ठीक है? Then एक एक्ट आया 1856 में during the tenure of Canning. This was known as the General Service Enlistment Act. इसमें एक प्रोविजन डाला गया that from this point onwards, जो भी नए रिक्रूट्स होंगे, all new recruits into the company's army, they will have to sign an undertaking. और क्या अंडरटेकिंग लेना होगा उनको? दैट दे कैन नॉट रिफ्यूज टू सर्व anywhere in the world if ordered to do so by their superiors, right? This was threatening to the upper caste Hindus, especially within the army. क्यों? ओवरसीज ट्रैवल के अगेंस्ट एक टैबू था. माना यह जाता था that if an individual travels across the Black Seas, तो काला पानी के अक्रॉस कहीं पे जाएगा, या फिर he travels across the land or beyond the land where the munj grass grows, that is the region of Punjab, तो munj grass वहां तक grow होती है, then they are going to be outcast. They are going to lose their religion and their caste. Upon returning, they would not be accepted into their own caste. Reason क्या था इसका? Superstition ही है that outside India they will not be able to observe their caste-based restrictions upon diet, upon intermingling, etc. Right? So they are going to lose their purity and they are going to be seen as impure upon their return. Now, this was a very alarming proposition for the conservative-minded upper caste recruits in the company's army. तो उनको ये नामंजूर था. लेकिन now this was becoming compulsory requirement even for recruitment into the army. So this was also causing a great degree of resentment, right? it further convinced the upper caste Indian soldiers that the company is deliberately trying to destroy their religion, destroy their caste, to ease their conversion into Christianity. ठीक है? And finally, एक rumor start हुआ that the company is also mixing bone dust of cows and pigs into the आटा that is being used to bake the chapatis जो कि soldiers को दी जाती थी. अब ये rumor ही था, इसमें सच्चाई नहीं थी, but rumors have an uncanny knack of assuming the shape of truth अगर उसके लिए कंडीशन सही. ठीक है? सो ऑलरेडी रिलीजियस टेंशन इतनी हाई थी, वो जो स्पार्क ऑफ सस्पिशन है दैट हैड ऑलरेडी बीन लिट, और ये रूमर इट गेव फर्दर क्रीडेंस. और जब वो ग्रीस कार्टेजेस वाला इश्यू आया तो सिपाहियों को लगा ये सब कुछ सच है. राइट? दे वर एंटायरली कन्विंस्ड दैट द कंपनी वाज ट्राइंग टू डिस्ट्रॉय देयर रिलीजन. So for them, it became not only a matter of defending themselves, their honor and their people against colonial exploitation, but to defend their religion itself. तो धर्म की लड़ाई बन गई. So that is why they participated so enthusiastically and in such large numbers. Further, service in the company's army, especially in the recent decades, had become less economically profitable for the soldiers, for the Indian sipahis, right? तो कंपनी ने कुछ ऐसे नए रेगुलेशंस इंट्रोड्यूस किए कि जो सोल्जर्स की पे है वो अफेक्ट हो रही थी, राइट? एंड आफ्टर ऑल द सोल्जर्स, इंडियन सीपॉयज, वर सर्विंग इन द कंपनीज आर्मी because they were being paid regularly, because they were being paid relatively higher than their counterparts in the armies of Indian rulers, right? So that one inducement that linked them to the company was also now losing its shine, right? तो किस तरह के चेंजेस हो रहे थे? The economic interests of Indian sepoys were hurt as well, right? तो किस तरह के नए पॉलिसी चेंजेस? 1856 में Dalhousie introduced a new regulation which said that from now on those soldiers who were posted in Punjab or Sindh are now no longer going to receive the foreign service allowance. तो फॉर एग्जाम्पल आप लोग भी सिविल सर्विसेज में जाएंगे, अगर आपका फॉरेन में पोस्टिंग होता है या फिर किसी फ्रंटियर रीजन में पोस्टिंग होता है तो आपको कुछ एडिशनल पे दिया जाता है, सो दैट देयर इज एन इंसेंटिव टू गो एंड सर्व देयर, राइट? So Punjab and Sindh were earlier not part of the British Empire. They had recently been occupied in 1843 and 1840, 55, 56, right? And इसके बाद से they were no longer considered foreign. तो वहां पे foreign service भत्ता जो बोलते थे जिसको, वो discontinue कर दिया गया. Now this was a substantial amount. It was roughly 30% of the average salary of the sepoys serving there. तो 30% सैलरी में जो इजाफा उनको मिला हुआ था वो अब उनसे छिन गया. तो दिस कॉज्ड रिजेंटमेंट. सेकेंडली, 1854 में एक एक्ट आया नोन एज द इंडियन पोस्ट एंड टेलीग्राफ एक्ट. अब इसने इंट्रोड्यूस किया द पोस्टेड स्टैम्प, राइट? Earlier, the sepoys used to enjoy free military post. तो मिलिट्री एक से दूसरी जगह पर अपना खुद का पोस्टल सिस्टम मेंटेन करती थी, कोई स्टैंप नहीं लगता था. Now, stamp would have to be purchased. The salary of the Indian sepoys was already quite meager. Additional burden उसके ऊपर ये लग गया. So this also caused further resentment. Further, कुछ ऐसे recent developments हुए थे which had shattered the military prestige of the British, right? So the British had suffered some military defeats in the recent decades and years, such as during certain battles in the Anglo-Sikh wars, such as their defeat in the Anglo-Afghan war, such as the defeat suffered during the Crimean War, etc. तो इसका result क्या हुआ? Till now, the Indians believed that nobody could defeat the British, right? So a certain aura of invincibility had surrounded the British, that they could not be defeated by any enemy, right? But now that myth of invincibility was suddenly shattered. The British target appeared to be more real, more human, more defeatable, more conquerable, right? And this emboldened the Indian sepoys to act that we can also defeat them, right? So the shattering of the myth of British invincibility. This also emboldened the Indian sepoys. And finally, mutinying against superior officials, especially for such kinds of causes, was not a new proposition for the Indian sepoys. There was a well-established tradition and precedent for this. And established tradition of sepoy mutinies already existed. On previous occasions, the Indian sepoys had rebelled at Vellore in 1826, at Barakpur in 1825, in Punjab in 1842, 1839 to 42, etc. Right? Now, generally, कोई ऐसी आर्मी जो कि रिस्पॉन्सिव होती है, those who are concerned about the welfare of their soldiers, they are going to try and address the root causes. The British were not that kind of an army, right? They did not attempt to address the root causes. And therefore, since the root causes were alive, this tradition also remained alive. In fact, violent mutinying was the only acceptable way for the Indian sepoys to register their discontent, register their anger. कोई fair hearing नहीं होता था, कोई peaceful resolution of disputes or discontent नहीं होता था. So only option available to the Indians was violent expression of discontent, right? So it was in keeping with this tradition that there was a major sepoy mutiny in 1857 as well. So give this heading military causes. और एक एक करके लिखो. Number 1, racial discrimination. Racial discrimination. यहाँ पे आगे लिख सकते हो as discussed earlier, within brackets, as discussed earlier. Number 2, right? The sepoy was essentially a peasant in uniform. A peasant in uniform. Full stop. Right. Welcome back. आवाज आ रही है प्रतीक? Hi. Okay. So we're talking about that the sepoy was essentially a peasant in uniform. आगे लिखो full stop करके. His discontent mirrored the general discontent of ordinary Indians. Mirrored the general discontent of ordinary Indians. Full stop. Subpoint. Example. The sepoys of Awadh. The sepoys of Awadh were the largest section. Of rebels. Since Awadh had recently been annexed. ठीक है. Number 3. Next main point. Rising religious tensions. देखो. Service in the company's army was coming increasingly at odds with the religious preferences, beliefs and practices of the Indian sepoys. Religious beliefs, preferences and practices of the Indian sepoys. ठीक है. नेक्स्ट मेन पॉइंट लिखो और सब पॉइंट लिखो. नंबर 1 2 3 करके. नंबर 1. British officials and chaplains openly mocked Hindu gods and the Islamic faith, and pressurized soldiers to accept Christianity. Number 2. The General Service Enlistment Act (1856) required that every new recruit would have to provide an undertaking that to would have to provide an undertaking that they would not refuse to serve abroad, to serve abroad. Full stop. This was in violation of the upper caste taboo against overseas travel. Against overseas travel. Number 3, rumors that the British were mixing animal bone dust into the flour, FLOUR, alarmed both Hindus and Muslims. Alarmed both Hindus and Muslim soldiers. Alarmed both Hindu and Muslim soldiers. Number 4, greased cartridges issue. Greased cartridges issue. ठीक है? So these were the issues causing religious tension within the army. Next main point लिखो. Number 3 है 4 है? Number 4, write down. Number 4. The economic interests. The economic interests of Indian sepoys. Of Indian sepoys had also been harmed. Had also been harmed in the recent years. In the recent years. लिखो in points. In 1849, Dalhousie passed a resolution. Dalhousie passed a resolution discontinuing the foreign service allowance or bhatta for soldiers serving in Sindh and Punjab. Next point. The Indian Post Act. The Indian Post Act 1854 also abolished the military post. The military post and made the use of postage stamps compulsory. And made the use of postage stamps compulsory. Which added further economic burden upon the sepoys. Upon the sepoys. Next, number 5. The myth of British invincibility. The myth of British invincibility had been shattered. Had been shattered. Myth of British invincibility had been shattered. Full stop. Point wise, right? In the recent past, comma, the British had suffered some embarrassing defeats during the Second Anglo-Sikh War. During the Second Anglo-Sikh War, comma, the Crimean War, and the First Anglo-Afghan War, Full stop. Next point. Their aura of invincibility was broken, comma, emboldening the Indian sepoys to act. Emboldening the Indian sepoys to act. Next, number 6. There was a well-established tradition. Of Indian sepoy mutinies against British officials. Point wise लिखो. Write down. The company's army left no space for the sepoy to register his discontent in a peaceful manner. Next point. Further, comma, the military organization made no attempt to address the root causes of sepoy discontent. Next point. Therefore, sepoy mutinies were were an essential ingredient of British military history in India. Of British military history in India. Full stop. In this sense, the mutiny of 1857, was a continuation of the series of earlier mutinies, including the Bengal Mutiny, Vellore Mutiny, Barakpur Mutiny, and mutiny during the Afghan War. Mutiny during the Afghan War. ठीक है, ये हो गए मिलिट्री कॉजेज. लास्ट सेट ऑफ कॉजेज क्या बचे हैं? दी सोशियो कल्चरल कॉजेज. किस तरह के सोशियो कल्चरल कॉजेज आइडेंटिफाई कर सकते हैं हम? सोचो बताओ जरा. Did the British make any attempt to interfere in the Indian society before this point? क्या क्या करने की कोशिश कर रहे थे? वेस्टर्नाइजेशन, क्रिश्चियनाइजेशन करने की कोशिश कर रहे थे, राइट? सोशल रिफॉर्म लेजिस्लेशंस इंट्रोड्यूस कर रहे थे. बैन ऑन सती, बैन ऑन lifting the ban on widow remarriages. They were seen as deliberate attempts by the orthodox sections of the Indian community, of the Indian society, to attack and destroy their religion. The support given by the administrative machinery to Christian missionaries, right? The economic as well as administrative support, that was seen as a deliberate design by the orthodox sections of Indians to Christianize India. The aggressive advancement of Western education, especially making it impossible for ordinary Indians to live a dignified life without attaining Western education. That was also seen as a tool to marginalize the conservative sections of Indians. Then certain unpopular policies had been introduced, such as taxing the property and lands of temples and mosques. These were domains which had traditionally been not taxed by any of the earlier rulers, right? So अब इनके ऊपर टैक्स लगाया गया, and that is why it was felt that once again their religion is under threat. Both Islam and Hinduism is under threat. Then certain acts such as the Religious Disabilities Act of 1856 introduced by Dalhousie. क्या बोला इसने? That if any Hindu person converts from Hinduism to Christianity, these would not be legal grounds for his disowning, for his डिसइनहेरिटेंस, ठीक है, फ्रॉम हिज इनहेरिटेंस इन दी एंसेस्ट्रल प्रॉपर्टी, ठीक है। तो यानी कि कन्वर्ट हो जाता है, उसके बाद भी उसको एलिनेट नहीं किया जा सकता अपने इनहेरिटेंस के साथ, राइट। सो दिस was actually removing a major hurdle towards the conversion of Hindu people to Christianity. So once again, this was seen as an attack on Hinduism. Clear? So write down एक एक करके. Number 1, social reform legislations such as the ban on sati, comma, removing the prohibition on widow remarriage, and allowing girls to receive education, to receive education alarmed the conservative Indians, alarmed the conservative Indians. These acts, these acts were perceived as an undue interference, an undue interference in Indian social matters. Full stop. Conservative Indians became suspicious that the British were deliberately attempting to destroy the fabric, became suspicious that the British were deliberately trying to destroy the fabric, were deliberately trying to destroy the fabric of Indian society, of Indian society, to Christianize and westernize it, to Christianize and westernize it. Next लिखो number 2, the activities of Christian missionaries and the attitude of the government towards them, and the attitude of the government towards them also alarmed Indians, also alarmed Indians. Write down point wise. Forcible conversions, comma, mass conversions and conversions by inducement were either overlooked or actively supported by the British administration. Full stop. Next point. The hostility of the Christian missionaries towards the Indian religions and the open support given to them by the British government caused further resentment. ठीक है. Third, the taxation of Indian places of religious worship such as mosques and temples infuriated the Maulvis and Pandits along with pious Indians from all backgrounds. Next point. This was an unprecedented development in Indian history. Development in Indian history. Next लिखो number 4. The Religious Disabilities Act 1856. The Religious Disabilities Act 1856 allowed a Christian convert to inherit the property of his heathen father. Right? तो ये उस समय का वोकैबुलरी है, आजकल यूज नहीं होता. दिस इज कंसिडर्ड टू बी अ डेरोगेटरी टर्म. Heathen is somebody who does not believe in God. तो क्रिश्चियंस या मुस्लिम्स में जो इंडियन गॉड्स हैं, जो पॉलीथियस्टिक मैनिफेस्टेशंस ऑफ गॉड हैं, उनको गॉड का ट्रू मैनिफेस्टेशन नहीं माना जाता है, राइट? अकॉर्डिंग टू देम देयर इज ओनली वन सुप्रीम गॉड एंड ही इज फॉर्मलेस। तो हिंदूज को उन्होंने हीदेंस का दर्जा दे दिया था, जैसे इस्लाम में पहले काफिर का दर्जा दिया जाता था, अभी भी कुछ लोग मानते हैं, राइट? तो अपने हीदन फादर्स की प्रॉपर्टी को वो फ्रीली इनहेरिट कर सकता है, ऐसा इस एक्ट ने प्रोवाइड किया। तो क्या लिखा है आपने? The Religious Disabilities Act 1856 allowed a Christian convert to inherit the property of his heathen father. Write down. Point. Next point लिखो. This removed a major hurdle. Removed a major hurdle towards the mass conversion of Hindus to Christianity. To Christianity. And was perceived as a direct attack. As a direct attack on Hinduism. On Hinduism by the British. By the British. ठीक है? कंक्लूजन लिखो. Therefore, the Great Revolt of 1857, the Great Revolt of 1857 was the outcome of general discontent that had accumulated over decades among Indians of all classes due to a variety of factors. ठीक है? So these were the causes for the Great Revolt of 1857. Take down one question. In the Sepoy Mutiny of 1857 was a sudden, unexpected, and contained phenomenon. Discuss critically. The Great Revolt of 1857 was a spontaneous uprising of malcontents which disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. Comment. ठीक है, क्वेश्चंस की दोनों की वर्डिंग अलग अलग है बट आंसर्स टू अ लार्ज एक्सटेंट सेम रहेगा, राइट? नाउ इन द फर्स्ट क्वेश्चन, व्हाट इज द डिमांड? क्या डिस्कस करना है हमें? We need to critically evaluate the truth of whether the sepoy mutiny was a sudden, unexpected and contained phenomenon, right? Contained का मतलब क्या हुआ? That it remained a sepoy mutiny only from the beginning to the end without affecting any other section. Is this correct or incorrect? गलत है, right? Other sections also participated. In fact, in several places, especially in the Awadh, civilian participation was far greater than the participation of ordinary sepoys. Was it a sudden and unexpected phenomenon? No, it was an inevitable result of the general feeling of discontent that had accumulated among Indians due to colonial misrule over the previous century, right? So it was very much an expected and inevitable phenomenon, not an sudden or expected phenomenon. Clear? होना ही होना था. It was simply that the issue of grease cartridges in 1857 made it happen in that year. Otherwise, it would have happened due to some other triggering factor. Okay? So that is what we need to focus upon. Second question, the Great Revolt of 1857 was a spontaneous uprising of malcontents which disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. तो यहाँ पे वो सब आपको इंक्लूड करना होगा जो यहाँ पे आपने इंक्लूड किया है. Apart from that, was it as quick to appear as it had disappeared? Sorry, was it as quick to disappear as it had appeared? For the British, it may have felt that it was sudden, but as we have already addressed, it had been building up for a long period of time. So neither was its appearance sudden, nor did it disappear immediately. It is true that the uprising was largely suppressed within the next year itself. तो 1857, 1858 में uprising तो खत्म हो गई थी, but that general feeling of discontent, the British could not root that out of the Indian consciousness. Indians had tasted blood for the first time. The Indians had also learned some important lessons. And the revolt of 1857 is considered very rightly so to be the first spark of national rebellion or national struggle against the British rule. And this is going to continue for the better part of the next century till the independence of India was attained. ठीक है? So neither did it appear suddenly nor did it disappear suddenly. Material terms में देखोगे तो बोलोगे कि एक साल में सप्रेस हो गया, but in a spiritual, emotional and ideological sense, if you consider it in a historical sense, then you will find that 1857 से एक नया हिस्ट्री शुरू हुआ which lasted till 1947 and even beyond. Clear? तो यहाँ पे जो स्पार्क लगा था वो यहाँ पे जाके एक आग का फॉर्म लेगा. क्लियर? सो दैट इज व्हाट यू विल हैव टू ऐड. हो जाएगा? ठीक है. तो कॉजेस हमने एड्रेस कर लिए हैं. नेक्स्ट वी नीड टू एड्रेस, क्या एड्रेस करना है? दी स्टॉर्म सेंटर्स एंड लीडर्स ऑफ द रिबेलियन. ठीक है. तो व्हाट वर द इंपॉर्टेंट सेंटर्स ऑफ द रिबेलियन? सबसे पहले तो ये बताओ which region of India or which region of the British Indian Empire was worst affected by the rebellion? North India, primarily the region from Delhi up to Bihar with certain pockets of Bengal. ठीक है, तो इसी रीजन में सारे लीडर्स भी आपको मिलेंगे, इसी रीजन में आपको सारे सेंटर्स भी मिलेंगे. The mutiny of soldiers began in Meerut on the 10th of May 1857, right? यहाँ पे लीडर्स कौन थे? The soldiers themselves. Right? Now, why had they mutinied? तो ट्रेनिंग चल रही थी मेरठ में कैंटोनमेंट में, एंड soldiers were being trained to use the Enfield rifle. A company of Indian soldiers refused to accept the Enfield rifles. They were court-martialed. सजा सुनाई गई और सजा को कैरी आउट करने के पहले, यानी कि पहले जेल भेजने के पहले वहीं लोकल जेल में उनको रखा गया था, लोकल प्रिजन में रखा गया था. राइट? Some Indian officials, some Indian soldiers approached the British कि इनको छोड़ दीजिए, we do not want to accept this cartridge क्योंकि ये हमारे रिलीजन के खिलाफ है. The British turned them away. एक लिप सर्विस करने के लिए एक इंक्वायरी कमेटी बिठा दी, लेकिन उसने भी बोला कि जो सोल्जर्स के फियर्स हैं वो अनफाउंडेड हैं, दे आर एक्टिंग आउट ऑफ रिलीजियस सुपरस्टिशन. ठीक है, तो अंधविश्वास है उनका, ऐसा कोई रियल है नहीं, रियलिटी है नहीं, कोई काउ एंड पिग फैट वगैरह नहीं मिला हुआ है इसमें. बट द सोल्जर्स वर नॉट कन्विंस्ड. सो ऑन द 10th of May दे रिवोल्टेड. कुछ सुपीरियर ऑफिशियल्स को उन्होंने मार दिया, कुछ को इम्प्रिजन कर लिया, and they looted the armory. हथियार वहां से ले लिए. They went to the jail. They freed their compatriots, and then from there they marched to Delhi. ठीक है. दिल्ली क्यों आए? Because it was the old Mughal capital. The emperor was still residing there. The British were ruling in India under the name, seal and authority of the Mughal emperor even to that point of time. ठीक है, यानी कि रियल पावर तो अंग्रेजों के हाथ में थी, बट द एम्परर ऑफ इंडिया वाज कंसिडर्ड टू बी द मुगल्स ओनली. And the soldiers had arrived at Delhi in order to convince the Mughal emperor to join their cause. Initially he vacillated, यानी कि पहले थोड़ा reluctant था, but at the end he was either threatened or forced or convinced by the soldiers to join their cause and emerge as their leader. Who was the Mughal emperor? Bahadur Shah II or Bahadur Shah Zafar. However, Bahadur Shah Zafar was neither willing nor very capable. The Mughal emperor by this point of time was like an eagle who had been born inside a cage and had lived till his old age inside that cave. तो he had the ability to fly, लेकिन उसने कभी सीखा ही नहीं था, उसके कभी ऐसे मंसूबे ही नहीं थे कि मुझे भी फ्लाइट लेना है, उड़ना है. आई एम ऑल्सो ग्रैंड बर्ड ऑफ प्रे. लोगों को मुझसे डरना चाहिए, मुझे रिस्पेक्ट करना चाहिए, ऐसा उसका कुछ इंटेंशन नहीं था. Therefore, he was not a suitable leader. And in this regard, the Mughal face of the rebellion actually emerged as Begum Zeenat Mahal, his wife and empress. Right? However, even she had a minor role in the day-to-day affairs of administration of Delhi as well as the organization of the rebellion. That was done primarily by a council of soldiers, the Council of Delhi. इसमें 6 soldiers थे, 4 civilians थे. Their leader was an Indian official who had been given the title of general. कौन थे? जनरल बख्तियार खान और बख्त खान. ठीक है, तो दिल्ली में ये लीडरशिप था. एट कानपुर, कौन रिजाइड कर रहा था? the adopted son of the former Peshwa Bajirao II. Bajirao II याद है, he had been pensioned off to Bettur near Kanpur by the British following the Third Anglo-Mysore War. He had been residing over there और उनको एक पेंशन मिल रही थी. डॉक्ट्रिन ऑफ लैप्स लगाया डलहौजी ने. क्या बोला? those Indian rulers who have been granted a pension by the British will have no right to nominate a successor, to nominate an adopted successor. Bajirao II did not have any natural sons, therefore he adopted Nana Sahib, right? नाना साहेब का पेंशन डलहौजी ने रुकवा दिया अंडर द डॉक्ट्रिन ऑफ लैप्स. देयरफॉर फर्स्ट ही अपील्ड, इन्होंने अपने एम्बेसडर्स भेजे ब्रिटेन टू रिस्टोर हिज पेंशन. व्हेन दे फेल्ड, some soldiers approached him, including Azimullah, and according to a certain narrative, Azimullah virtually forced Nana Sahib to accept the leadership of the rebellion from Kanpur. Nana Sahib also had another supporter, कौन? तात्या टोपे. ठीक है. तो this was the leadership at Kanpur. Nana Sahib, Tatia Tope, and Azimullah, a sepoy. Another center of the revolt was Bareilly. यहाँ पे लीडर कौन था? खान बहादुर. Who was he? He was an old dispossessed landlord. He had lost his zamindari, which had been auctioned off, and he was angry because of that. ठीक है. Another center of the revolt, झांसी. यहाँ पे लीडर कौन थे? रानी लक्ष्मीबाई. Why was she fighting the British? डॉक्ट्रिन ऑफ लैप्स में इनके स्टेट को भी अंग्रेजों ने एनेक्स कर लिया था, एंड शी वाज फाइटिंग फॉर द राइट ऑफ हर अडॉप्टेड सन टू इनहेरिट हिज throne at Jhansi, right? Another prominent center was Lucknow. यहाँ पे बेगम हजरत महल. When Nawab Wajid Ali Shah was removed from his position as Nawab, the British annexed Awadh on the pretext of misgovernance. Begum Hazrat Mahal protested against this. She wanted her minor son, Bijlis Qadir, to come to the throne. The British were not ready to accept it. Therefore, she led a rebellion in which she was supported by the general masses of Awadh as well as the Talukdars of Awadh. Some other prominent centers of the revolt were Faizabad, and Patna. Now these were major Wahhabi centers, right? And Wahhabis अंग्रेजों से काफी पहले से लड़ रहे थे in different parts of India. पंजाब, बिहार, अवध, बंगाल, पूरे नॉर्थ इंडिया में they were contesting the British rule. They wanted to establish an Islamic state in India, right? Therefore यहाँ पे leaders कौन होंगे? Are they going to be some zamindar or some ruler, or is it going to be some Maulvi? कोई मौलवी वगैरह होंगे, राइट? तो एट फैजाबाद इट वाज मौलवी Ahmadullah, and at Patna it was Maulvi Peer Ali. Another prominent center of the revolt in Bihar was Ara or Jagdishpur. यहाँ पे लीडर थे कुंवर सिंह. He was also a dispossessed zamindar of Ara. ठीक है? So these were the storm centers and leaders of the revolt. Now एक नोट लिख लो इसमें. The revolt was largely a North Indian affair. A North Indian affair. Affecting the region between Delhi and Bihar. Between Delhi and Bihar. Full stop. Next point. It began on the 10th of May 1857 when sepoys at Meerut killed their superiors, comma, freed their imprisoned comrades, comma, looted the armory and marched to Delhi. Next point. At Delhi, comma, they proclaimed Bahadur Shah Zafar as the leader of the revolt. Full stop. This was a development of immense political significance. कैसे? Was Bahadur Shah Zafar able to provide them any material support? Was he able to provide them men, money, material, etc.? नहीं. But what was he able to provide them? Legitimacy. ठीक है? Till now, their mutiny was simply that, a mutiny of disgruntled soldiers against their superior officials. तो उन्होंने अभी तक केवल आर्मी में अपने सुपीरियर्स के अगेंस्ट बगावत करी थी. By proclaiming Bahadur Shah Zafar, the Mughal emperor, as the leader of their mutiny, they had transformed their mutinous act into an act of general revolt, in which the whole of India was involved. Okay? So they had transformed their small sepoy mutiny into a general revolt of Indians against the British. Secondly, although the British crown had lost its shine, the tradition of the Mughal rule over India still existed. Okay? So many Indian rulers, many Indian princes still respected the nominal sovereignty of the Mughal authority. And following this proclamation, letters were drafted and sent to various royal courts across India asking for them to join the rebellion. Okay? Thus, the the long history of Mughal rule across India had transformed them in the Indian memory as the rulers of an all India empire. So it had a very powerful unifying force associated with it. Okay? So this was the political significance. Write down. Subpoint 1 and 2. Number 1. With this act, comma, the sepoys had transformed their mutiny. The sepoys had transformed their mutiny into a general revolt of Indians. Their mutiny into a general revolt of Indians against the British. Into a general revolt of Indians against the British. ठीक है? Next, number 2. Further, this proclamation gave an all India sense to the revolt, since the long history of Mughal rule had transformed the Mughals into a symbol of all India unity. Number 3. The rebels drafted letters for rulers across India encouraging them to join the rebellion and expel the British. Okay? So, on the basis of this, would it be accurate to say that the soldiers exhibited very sophisticated political consciousness or not? Politically conscious थे या नहीं थे? Did they understand the political importance of symbolism? Yes. Write down. Thus, next main point. Thus, the Indian sepoys exhibited sophisticated political consciousness in proclaiming Bahadur Shah Zafar as their leader. As their leader. ठीक है? ये हो गए the leaders and storm centers. नेक्स्ट क्या देखना है हमें? the spread and extent of the revolt. ठीक है? तो first of all we have to see what was the physical spread of the revolt, the areas that were affected by the rebellion. कौन से एरियाज हैं? नॉर्थ इंडिया, नेमली दी गंगा यमुना दोआब प्राइमरीली. ठीक है? That means present day Delhi, Western UP, Central UP, Awadh, Bihar, and parts of Bengal. ठीक है? Did it affect Punjab, Maharashtra, Mysore, that is Karnataka, Kerala, Tamil Nadu, etc.? यहाँ पे कोई इफेक्ट इसका नहीं पड़ा. What were the classes that participated? बताइए. Several classes participated, including the peasants, artisans, shopkeepers, petty traders, etc. That means इस region में there was large scale participation of the commoners. ठीक? And among the elites who participated, zamindars who had lost their zamindaris, rulers who had lost their kingdoms, and the officials who were associated with these zamindars and rulers. That means among the elites, only those who had suffered from British rule, they participated. What about those elites who had not directly been harmed by British rule? Did they participate? No. Did they remain neutral? No. In fact, in many cases, they actively helped the British in suppressing the rebellion. These include the big landlords who had gotten their zamindaris because of the British, or the money lenders who were dependent upon the legal protections being given to them by the British, or the other Indian rulers such as the Scindias of Gwalior, who even after losing their capital city of Gwalior to the rebels from Jhansi, kept on supporting the British. Okay? What about the intellectuals? That is the middle class intelligentsia. Did they participate? No, they did not participate. Did they support the British? No, they also did not support the British. Rather, they remained neutral, right? तो इनका क्या मानना था? That the kind of vision that the rebels have for India is not in tune with their vision of future India. The rebels want to restore the picture of the medieval age. They want to restore the feudal picture of India. They want to restore the caste-ridden society, the backward, superstitious society and religiously dominated society of India. So उनके साथ हम नहीं हैं, but at the same time, we can also sympathize with the anger that they are feeling, because the exploitation of the British rule, British regime is obvious. And while we stand in solidarity with the rebels, we do not agree with their methods. At the same time, we believe that with a few minor modifications, the British rule in India may be made more humane. It may be made beneficial to Indians. It may be made more munificent towards Indians. Okay? So they maintained neutrality. Is this clear? When it came to religious communities, which ones participated? इस रीजन में majority religious communities या major religious communities कौन कौन सी हैं? Hindus or Muslims primarily. Did they participate? Yes. What was the kind of relationship between them? Complete and absolute unity. For example, as soon as the rebellion was declared, बहादुर शाह जफर ने अपने खतों में ये लिखा, प्रोक्लेमेशन में ये लिखवाया that from now on there should be a voluntary ban on the slaughter of cows, right? This was so that the religious sentiments of Hindus would not be hurt. Similarly, the playing of music during the religious processions and festivities of Muslims was also prohibited voluntarily by the Hindu rulers across India, right? So both Hindus and Muslims participated enthusiastically and displayed complete unity. ठीक है? Which genders participated? Both men and women. Both men and women participated in large numbers. And यहाँ पे notable चीज क्या है? that women often found themselves in roles of leadership. That women were performing leadership roles. Right? This is evident at Jhansi also, at Lucknow also, and at Delhi also. Three prominent women: Rani Lakshmi Bai, Begum Hazrat Mahal, and Begum Zinat Mahal. What was the level of civilian participation? Was it muted or high? High levels of civilian participation, especially in Awadh. It was extremely high. In fact, out of the 1.5 lakh casualties in Awadh, that means the people who lost their lives in the rebellion, 1 lakh were civilians and the remaining 50,000 were sepoys. Right? So, in certain regions, it was much higher than sepoys. ठीक है? What about the different castes? While all castes participated, सबसे ज्यादा enthusiastically किसने participate किया? Upper castes और lower castes? Upper castes ने. Why? Because their religious interests, their caste-based interests were being attacked by the British, or at least they felt the threat toward that most perceptibly. All castes participated, but the participation of the upper castes was the most intense. तो इसके लिए एक रीजन तो वही है कि अपर कास्ट के जो रिलीजियस इंटरेस्ट थे वो ब्रिटिश रेजिम थ्रेटन कर रहा था, एंड सेकेंडली देयर एक्सिस्टेड अ नेचुरल टेंशन between the upper castes and the lower castes. So, while it may have been possible for the upper castes to come together with the Muslims, it was not as easy for the lower castes to accept the upper castes as their leaders even in this violent rebellion. तो ऐसा नहीं है कि पार्टिसिपेशन कहीं हुआ नहीं, लेकिन इट वाज म्यूटेड. ठीक है? अपर कास्ट्स वर द मोस्ट enthusiastic. नाउ रेबल्स ने टारगेट किसको किसको किया? फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल ब्रिटिश आर्मरीज, वहां से वेपन्स लूटने के लिए. ऑफिसेज, कोर्ट्स एंड ports, garrisons, cantonments. इनको टारगेट किया। सेकेंडली, ब्रिटिश ऑफिशियल्स were targeted, both civilian and police officials, political officers, etc. Soldiers were targeted, obviously, but even British civilians, including British traders, bankers, as well as women and children. ठीक है, तो even they were not left alone. Along with them, who else were targeted? The Indian collaborators with British rule. Including the big zamindars, money lenders, and loyal Indian princes. They were also targeted by the British, by the rebels. Along with this, a deliberate attempt was made to disrupt the lines of communication. Therefore, postage and telegraph infrastructure was targeted, along with the blocking of major roads and canals. ठीक है, so all these things were disrupted. Right? तो ये हो गया the spread and extent. Next, we have to talk about the reasons for the failure of the rebellion. Now, the majority of the factors we have already covered in our discussion up to this point. तो जो causes हैं, leaders हैं, जो spread and extent of the rebellion है, उसमें कुछ flaws present हैं, which were responsible for the failure of the rebellion. These we are going to discuss in tomorrow's lecture. ठीक है? Till then आप लोग भी कुछ सोच के आइएगा, ये क्या ऐसे flaws थे which were responsible for its failure. हाँ प्रतीक, कौन सा पॉइंट है? Can you let me know? Number 9. नहीं, स्टॉर्म सेंटर्स एंड लीडर्स में है। इंडियन कोलैबोरेटर्स। अच्छा। Indian collaborators such as big zamindars, money lenders, and loyal Indian princes. So those Indian rulers who remained loyal to the British. ठीक है? Anything else? चलिए. If there are no doubts, shall I end this session? No doubt. चलिए then. Thank you for your time. I'll see you guys tomorrow.